Story 1. 10 years ago, I'm working the front desk at this third-rate motel, and I'm the only employee on the property until 7 a.m. So I get this report of an unruly guest and check it out. Dude's whacked out on something, threatening other guests, and I call the cops to remove him. On their way out, they tell me he's got active warrants in another state. I didn't think anything of it until 3 months later when I got a check sent to me at work from a sheriff's office 2 states over. Turns out, the guy was wanted for a double homicide, and I got the reward when he was convicted. I felt pretty good about that. This is great. I hope you frame the story for your grandkids like, "Did I ever tell you about the time I was a bounty hunter?" Story 2. Not as similar, but when my mom was around 18, I'd say, she had a boyfriend who had seen a suspicious car full of people and driving quickly. I can't remember the other suspicious details. Anyway, he went to the police with the number plate of the car and got a 500-pound reward, as the people he'd helped the police to catch were bank robbers. Bear in mind that this is the early 90s, so 500 pounds is a lot of money. Story 3. This is kind of related. When I was younger, there was a bad drought, and the lake I went to fish at was probably 10 feet below where it usually is, maybe more, and I went to go fishing under a bridge with my stepdad. I got bored, so I started playing in the rocks. I found an old pocket knife and a pistol, turned the pistol into the local police department, and got a medal back from them and a letter where it was used in a case to convict a murderer. I don't really remember the details. I was in 4th or 5th grade. Story 4. My sister has a pretty weird hobby. She solves cold cases by helping match descriptions of bodies that have never been positively ID'd to missing persons matching the body's description. She has solved several cases and submits them to the FBI tip line. Twice now, she's gotten phone calls from law enforcement as a result. One from the FBI and one from a local police department. One had reward money tied to it from long ago. She turned it down. Both times, she's informed the agency calling that the missing person disappeared before she was 10 years old. That's her limit. She doesn't look at recent cases to avoid potential problems. And they just kinda shrug and move on. That's all. Story 5. In college, we had a drive-by shooting on my block. The police showed up and asked all the neighbors if they had any information. I just heard the shots from my house and wasn't able to help. A few days later, I was walking home from class and I found a shell casing in the grass near where the shooting was. I didn't want to touch it, so I got home and called the police. I was very specific about exactly where the shell casing was and that I do not want the police to come to my door. The neighbors were pretty sketchy people and I just didn't want to be seen being involved. Well, these cops walked right to my front door and asked for me. I told them exactly where to find it again. They walked to the general area, looked for maybe a minute, then walked back to my front door and asked if I could show where it was. Damn it. So I led them to the shell casing while the sketchy neighbors stood on their porch and watched, looking very displeased. Apparently, the fingerprints on the casing matched one of their suspects and he was arrested and went to jail. The cops stopped by a few months later with a $20 gift card to a sub shop. Story 6. I called Crime Stoppers once. The local news released a video of someone violently robbing a store. They beat up the cashier pretty bad. I knew it the second the video started who it was. A guy I used to party with and had spent the night with a few times. The Crime Stopper folks gave me a number to write down to claim the money if he was convicted. I wrote it on my hand, then washed it off accidentally, like an idiot. It was on the smaller side, I think around $1,000, but it would have made a big difference at the time. And the guy did end up getting convicted and is still in prison now. I'm sure a bunch of people called in though, so I don't know how much I would have gotten. Anyone who grew up in my area who was around my age would have known the guy. Story 7. My stepmom got a $25,000 FBI reward when she came across a girl who had been abducted. The girl had been held in the cabin next door to my parents' cabin for about 3 months. The guy who did it left her alone for a couple of hours and she escaped in the middle of winter in a very cold area. My stepmom was walking her dog in a pretty isolated area and the girl ran up to her. She was obviously very disoriented and traumatized, but my stepmom helped her escape through the woods to a safe place and called the cops. There was a huge media circus, and although the reward money, $25,000 from the FBI and $25,000 from a local business, was awarded to my stepmom, she concluded that since the girl had technically rescued herself, it was appropriate for the money to go to her. Apparently, there is some rule that you can't get FBI reward money in a case where you're either the victim or perpetrator, so the money had to be accepted and then gifted back to the girl. In the end, the girl got the money and my stepmom got a big tax bill that year because reward money is taxable. She got to be interviewed on national TV by Gayle King though, and, help save someone's life, so she's pretty okay with it. Story 8. A buddy of mine used to make quite a bit of extra money turning his customers into the police. He was an overnight clerk at the only 24-hour gas station in town, so at some point every drunk, druggy ne'er-do-well came in. One night, he's got a drunk regular mouthing off to his friends about how he caught a warrant for some stupid shit, but the cops were too dumb to catch him because he was staying with his sister and driving her car. He thought to himself, I wouldn't mind if I never had to deal with Dimitri, the drunk asshole, ever again. So the first chance he gets, he pops into the cop shop and asks if they're looking for a guy named Dimitri. Sure as they are, so he fills them in on Dimitri staying with his sister and driving her navy blue Cadillac. He even manages to fork over the license plate, thanks to the gas station cameras. Pop goes Dimitri, and a check for $500 shows up in my friend's mailbox a month later. After that, he'd hit the police station once a week to grab a copy of the Crime Stopper flyers and call his new cop friends whenever he recognized someone. Story 9. Sort of related, but one day I was browsing Facebook and came across one of those news bulletins from the sheriff's department in a neighboring county about a bank robbery that occurred shortly before the posting. They had a security camera photo of the robber, but no leads on an identity yet. I was like, LOL, that totally looks like my friend's brother. I screenshot it and sent it to her and said, "Is this your brother? It looks like him." She said, yeah, it did look pretty similar to him. Turns out, it was him. Story 10. I chased down a commercial truck hijacker. I saw him hijack a truck full of merchandise and cigarettes. He left the driver bloodied in the street, but he was otherwise okay. The hijacker didn't know much on how to drive a stick, so it gave me enough time to get to my car and try to follow him. I came across a police car cruising the neighborhood and flagged them down. I told them what happened, but they didn't seem to care. They turned in front of me in the direction I was headed as I continued to search for the truck. I suspected that it had turned down a side street. As we came towards a T in the road, the stolen truck turns in front of us, headed in the opposite direction. The cops move a little to the side to allow the truck to make its turn. I turned my car sideways to block the truck and laid on the horn. I could see the two cops look at each other like, WTF. They sat there wondering what the hell I was doing, so I got out and ran toward the truck, which spooked the hijacker. As he ran, I double-checked the truck to make sure it would not move anymore. I saw a fake gun on the floor and a pipe wrench. I took the pipe wrench and proceeded to chase the hijacker. When the cops saw me chasing the hijacker, they got out and also started chasing him. I couldn't catch up to him, so I threw the pipe wrench at him. I didn't expect it to actually hit him, but I nailed him right on the head, knocking him down. The cops caught up and arrested him. The hijacker had been wanted for 8 years worth of commercial truck hijackings, valued at over $5 million in merchandise. I testified against him in court, and he got 16 years in prison. The company that had been victim to his hijacking sent me a thank you letter. No reward from them or their insurance company. Story 11. Not me, and not for a reward, but my dad called once. I heard this story secondhand from my mom years later. My dad confirmed, but wouldn't really say much. My dad was in the Air Force Intelligence. If it has an actual name, I don't know it. That's just always what my parents called it. And served in Vietnam. Shortly after he'd gotten out, he went to hang out at his favorite bar where everyone knew him. There were a couple new people that started coming in while he'd been away. I guess one of them would always sit next to him and try to get chatty, but the questions they asked and their behavior and attitude set off red flags from my dad. He called the local FBI office and ended up in a meeting with them, etc. I don't know what happened in the end, other than the guy he reported stopped coming to the bar. Beyond that, nothing else was said by my folks. Oh, just remembered, another time in my early 20s, an old high school friend of mine I'd kept in touch with apparently went AWOL from the Navy, so one day we got a very serious and official knock on our door asking all about my friend. We were clueless, but I heard from others that eventually they caught up with him. Dishonorable discharge, no pay, etc. Story 12. I turned my own sister into my state's most wanted segment on the news. She was caught on camera with someone else breaking the law, and I sent in a tip that she was using my Uber account so I could see where she was going after the fact. Then she came out to my house to hide out, and I let them know. Played it off as if they randomly came to check and see if I knew where she was. She needed to go to jail and get some help. I received a check in the mail for $400 a little while later. Story 13. Not me, but my brother. My brother is a real estate agent in Puerto Vallarta, so he tends to see a lot of people. There was this guy that would frequently visit and owned property in one of the big golf courses. My brother happened to be browsing the FBI Most Wanted and saw a portrait that the FBI digitally rendered of what the person looked like now, as he was over 80, and it was very similar to this person he would frequently see in the area. My brother got into contact with them, and they asked for photos of the person and a little bit about who he was. My brother had to gather as much info of his schedule and the layout of the condos, so they made a plan and arrested him. If I'm correct, he traveled to Guadalajara, and that's where he was arrested. This was about 8 years ago. Story 14, kind of related. One summer, back in the mid-90s, a bunch of us went to Blackpool, UK for a long weekend. I lost the group in one of the massive multi-level nightclubs, and as it was close to kicking out time and I hadn't pulled, I thought I'd head back to our B&B. As I'm walking along some street, a guy at the back of a car with the boot opened asked me if I was interested in buying something. I didn't actually hear what he said. I was in my own little world. I looked into the boot of the car, and there's a shoebox missing its lid. Inside is a Beretta 9mm pistol. I recognized it immediately, as I was a bit of a gun nerd back then, and even had a pistol license at the time. I had an Astra Constable. Also in the box was a box of 50 rounds. No idea if it was a full box. I asked him how much he wanted for it, and he said 200 quid or something like that. I showed him I only had a tenner in my wallet and that I'd go to the cash point on the main strip. I'd be back in 5 minutes. I head off towards the main strip and call 999 on the first phone box I find, pre-mobile phone. Tell them all the details, the street name, and even a partial plate of the car. I then just carried on my way to the B&B. I gave them my name and details, but never heard back. No idea if they caught the guy or not. Story 15. I was hooking up with this girl, a cute waitress from the diner down the road, with the TV on in the background. The news was on, and there was a store owner talking about stereo robberies. I noticed his hands were fidgeting, and he wouldn't look the reporter in the eyes, so I called the police to let them know he was the one who did it. I ended up getting called into the police station for questioning because they thought I must be an accomplice. They were so skeptical that they said I was the lead suspect. I ended up telling them I was a psychic to get out of trouble, made a few convincing arguments, and they actually bought it. I ended up solving cases for the local PD for the next decade with my partner G Buttersnaps, as I pretended to be a psychic detective. Truth is, my dad was a cop and he raised me to be really good at situational awareness from a young age. Story 16. Almost did. I had a friend who decided to attack a bus driver because they didn't stop the bus when he wanted them to. Dude I was dating at the time was closer to him than I was, and found an article posted by the local police department asking for info on the situation and would reward around $3,500 or so. Both me and my ex went back and forth on the decision for about a day or two, but unfortunately, our friend had some really dangerous people he knew as backup that would easily know who it was and find us, and most likely do a drive-by or worse. So ultimately, we left it alone, hoping that our friend would turn himself in. Funny enough, this friend of ours came to school for one day after. We had no idea what he had done, but he sure did, and asked my ex to bail him out because he was in some trouble. Me and my ex laughed at him because we thought he was joking, and it also wasn't the first time he had asked to be bailed. Friend finally turned himself in about 2 months later. We found out that he had been on a pill binge that caused him to black out that day. He assaulted me a few weeks later, and we said our goodbyes to him for good. Don't know what happened to him, but I wish we had taken the call to action despite the risks. Not just for the money, but for justice as well, since that bus driver hasn't driven since. Not as interesting as the others, but I appreciate being able to get that story off my chest. Story 17. Only slightly related. At work, I worked with this coworker who did the bare minimum every day, never washed his uniform, etc. One day he came in and brought his computer. He said he had a failed part. I was helping customers as I do. I watched him install a new part and mentioned to me not paying for it and take it with him. Never saw him pay for it. This obviously didn't sit right with me. I'm not a goody two-shoes or whatever, but dude was a douche. Bragged about not paying. I don't know, I just had too much respect for my manager. He was dope, surprisingly, for where we worked. He respected us and treated us like people. So I told my manager. Dude got fired, and I guess they had kind of if you see something, you get rewarded. I got like $200, which was like 4 times the part that he stole. Honestly, it was probably worth it to the company to pay you that much. People like that, if left unchecked, can steal thousands of dollars worth of stuff before they're caught. For them, getting rid of him before he could do more damage is totally worth it. Story 18. I never called the FBI for an investigation. I feel like I got a reward from them investigating a case though. During a search, they found 3 kittens. They didn't disturb them and continued the search of the area for 3 days. 2 investigators realized the mother never came back. They were talking about it near my friend who worked next door in the plaza. He was interviewed already. He asked them if he could take them, and they initially said no. He asked if they could bring them to him, and they said okay. The FBI solved the case and made multiple arrests. My kitty is 11 years old now, and absolutely one of the best friends I could ever ask for. I did follow the case. I could link the case and story if anyone is interested. Kittens are not included in the story. Story 19. Called crime check after seeing an escaped felon in my neighborhood. Dude got arrested by the local PD, but I got denied the reward because the call was not taken by the right county. I only called because I happened to see him walking by my house. Could not have cared less about the reward. Story 20. Worked at a small local bank. A regular customer comes in and I greeted them by name. They hand their check and a note to me. Note says they have a gun and to hand over all the money in the drawer. I comply, and as the customer leaves, I push the emergency button. We had all of this person's info on file, and the police caught them at home. Bank recovered the money, person went to jail, and I got a small reward for catching them.